Saying the quiet parts out loud. There is so much more to that statement than uttering words with your mouth. Saying the quiet part out loud can happen in an action, in a book, in a painting, in a vote, in the choice of a religion. So much of how we express ourselves and how we define ourselves and how we stand up for ourselves is saying the quiet part out loud. As I contemplated this sentence today and yesterday and the past few days since I've sort of decided it's the theme of season 13, I have a million stories of times I didn't speak up, and I'll share a lot of those. But eventually that becomes redundant. So I got thinking about other ways that I've not said the quiet part out loud. And it comes down to consent. When I was a high school health educator, consent was a pretty feisty discussion. And oftentimes it was feisty because it seemed unfair between male bodied humans and female bodied humans. And I'm not saying men or women right now because I want to be very clear that there are times when the physical reality of the body, the genitalia, play a key factor in safety. There are times when the physical reality of the body, large, muscular, more powerful, taller, bigger boned, heavier, plays a key role in safety. And this is most commonly seen in domestic violence. 98% of domestic violence is male-bodied people, men, against female-bodied people, women. Regardless of how these individuals identify, the violence that's more prevalent in the male-bodied human is prevalent in any male-bodied human, regardless of what they call themselves. I'm not going to get into that whole measure of consent. That's a feisty conversation. But I am going to talk a lot about consent and how tricky it was to teach high school kids about this. Here's where it became tricky. I would talk to boys and girls, high school aged males and females. We talk about all of the things. What does consent mean? I think if you listen back in my podcast episodes, I have the whole vagina as a kitchen analogy of teaching consent, the whole cookies and stealing the cookies, sharing the cookies, starting to share the cookies and taking them back. Like it was all the different levels of consent. The key fixture came when alcohol was involved. So you cannot give consent if you are under the influence. So one of the boys typically would ask, well, then why can I get arrested for perpetrating the crime under the influence? If she's too drunk to say yes or no, then how come I can't be too drunk to know what I was doing? Well, and sometimes you can. Each situation is unique and different. But the bottom line is alcohol and drugs can take away your ability to understand what you're agreeing to, but it doesn't necessarily decrease the likelihood of the assault happening. Sometimes alcohol intensifies anger and it takes away self-control. So sexual assaults in particular, and oftentimes child abuse and domestic violence, often happen more with alcohol. But this was an important conversation. It got to the root of the matter that in general, men assault women, boys assault girls, men assault girls. Very, very rarely is sexual abuse perpetrated on the part of a female, and almost never is that sexual abuse violent. Very typical sexual abuse female to male is older teachers seducing younger students, like younger students, like middle school age. Been some very famous cases of relationships. Typically, sexual abuse female to male is outside the family setting, so to speak, would be inappropriate relationships. Not all of it. Please, mothers do horrible things to their children. There's that. But 98% of it is not female onto male. It's male to female or male to male. These were important conversations. We talked about the fact that so many sexual assaults take place on college campuses in the first 2 weeks of the semester. We've got a whole bunch of girls and boys that are away from home for the first time, don't understand the effects of being drunk, are in situations where this kind of stuff is prevalent. Consent. It's something that I've thought a lot about for a long time. In my inability to defend myself or stand up for myself or set boundaries for myself, and my prevalence for getting talked into things I don't really want, or just saying, okay, fine, and giving coerced consent, goes right back to being 7 and having a bad thing happen to me. No one asked me, hey, can I touch your private parts in the middle of the night when no one's home? And I never tried to say no. And I think it's because at the time I was just so little, I didn't think I could say no. You don't say no to your parents. I spent all of that time figuring out what I'd done wrong and how I could fix it. Every time I fixed it and it wasn't fixed, I thought, okay, I tried the wrong thing. I never once thought to myself that something was wrong with my dad. Not until I got to be a teenager and read some stories in True Story magazine and started to get talked about a little bit, but it just wasn't. We didn't bring this up at all growing up, at all. I look at how I was taught to defend myself. I was taught to seek perfection. I was taught to be quiet. I was taught to just survive, survive, survive till it's over and then you can fix it. Person that was touching my parts was way bigger than me and way older than me and in charge of me, in charge of a lot of things that were connected to my survival. The gaslighty wobbly part is that when the bad things weren't happening, he was terrific. So what do you do with that? Is it mine to hold for the rest of my life? I get a lot of antagonism from my family members for still being hung up on abuse that happened so long ago. Well, it does things to your brain. So I got thinking about consent. Here's the definition of consent, according to Siri. Voluntary, informed, and mutual agreement to engage in an activity or permit something to happen. It is the foundation of healthy relationships, ensuring everyone involved respects personal boundaries. That seems like a pretty straightforward definition, right? Except let's look at it for a minute. Voluntary. Okay, there's a million ways to assess whether or not somebody is voluntary, and you might misunderstand what that means, and we'll get into that in a minute. Informed. Well, the person that took whatever you did say you didn't consent to might think they'd told you enough for you to make up your mind, right? Mutual. You both agreed, okay, but did you? Respecting personal boundaries. There are so many people in the world that have no respect for personal boundaries, that don't even live their lives at all honoring the boundaries of the people they meet or not imposing their boundaries on others. This is where political strife, social ideology, all of these things can become tricky. So when I look at this, I remember once my father saying to me, if you had said stop, I would have stopped. To me, that's putting the responsibility on me to control my attacker. So I know women have gone to court for rape, and the rape conviction was overturned because she asked the rapist to wear a condom. This was a very famous case in New York City. And she wanted to get AIDS. She did not want to be raped. She did not want to have sex with this person. She was held against her will, knife point, and said, please, 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 just please use a condom. And so he did. And the judge at the time said, well, that implies consent. See where it gets tricky? It's not so black and white. It reminds me of the time analogy. 60 seconds can feel very different depending on what you're doing, right? So what do all these words mean? So the core principles of consent are as follows. It's freely given. No manipulation, pressure, or coercion. So anyone that's manipulating, pressuring, or coercing doesn't want to be found out as doing such. So they'll deny that to the hilt. This is where Roy comes to mind. Informed consent. All parties must clearly understand what they are agreeing with. So this is more like in medicine, risks, benefits, pros, cons, all that kind of stuff. Reversible. Consent can be withdrawn at any time, even in the middle of an activity. This can be the tricky part. Specific. Agreeing to one thing does not automatically mean agreeing to something else. So, for example, and this comes a lot in sexual assault. Well, she let me touch her boobs. Okay, well, touching her boobs isn't the same thing as touching her vagina, right? Like two different things, over the clothes, under the clothes. It's like the 1,000 tiny steps analogy. Each step dictates your next one until it doesn't, until you need to stop. This is why it's so hard sometimes for sexual abuse victims, male or female, to get any justice in court, because so much of the black and white, he said, she said, they said is gray. Here's when consent cannot be given. If somebody is under the influence of drugs or alcohol, if they're asleep or unconscious, if they're underage, disabled, incapacitated in any way that prevents them from understanding what's going to happen next. There once was in the state of New Hampshire statutes on consent, somebody in a position of power. So, for example, I could be over the legal age, but if it's my boss or the owner of the company I work for, or someone that has power over me, I've lost my ability to consent, because if I say no, there could be consequences, college professors, things like that. All of these things bring me back a lot to Gene Connolly and Chris Rath. They manipulated and coerced and threatened. So I agreed to things. I agreed that things were true. Talk about coercing a confession. That's another time that this kind of consent is often breached. This whole notion of consent and my inability to give it, or belief that I didn't deserve to give it, that if somebody was pressuring me to do something, it was my job to do it, even if I didn't want to. The number of things I have agreed to in my life because I feel like it's my job to do it are too many to count. It can be day-to-day things as running around and picking everything up all the time, cleaning up after other people. I feel like if nobody does it, Must be my job, I'll do it, or I'll do it because nobody does it, knowing that everyone else knows I'll eventually do it. I always do a funny example, but this is a consent issue. I'll start to do something and Kenny will say, "Oh, can I help you?" And he'll watch me do it for a significant amount of time before he offers the help. And then he offers when I'm done. So he's just offered in time for me not to be able to say he didn't offer to help. Or he'll say, I was just going to do that. Okay, well, you weren't because you didn't. In my life, as I think of little things, little personality quirks I have that go around consent, these things come up. So now they've given sort of some precursors, some prefixes to consent. And it's fascinating. One little word, expressed consent. Yes, yes. I was joking around years ago. I can't even remember now. In my 20s, college age or whatever. And I can't remember who it was, but it was a Nike Boston event. I think we were at a party or something. And I was sitting next to somebody who said, "Oh, yeah, that girl totally wants me. All these girls, they just need to get banged." And I'm like, "You mean you want to bang them all?" No, 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 that's not it at all. They need it. I'm here to help. And it was kind of a joke, but the undercurrent, the undertone of it is a bit sinister. So I looked at a guy and I said, "Well, that guy totally needs me to bang him." And he's like, "That's ridiculous." We laughed about it. And because it was so long ago, he couldn't wrap his head around the fact that, yes, it was ridiculous. And it was ridiculous. He was saying it too. It was that passive assignment of responsibility, the "what were you wearing" kind of thing. Express consent is yes, enthusiastic yes. No doubt about it. The word has been spoken. Informed consent. That goes back to a lot of the medical. You've done the research, you've asked the questions, you've talked to people about it, and you agree. So it's like signing a waiver, signing an agreement. I have people sign waivers to track camp. So informed consent, and you go through it. Yes, if something happens and it's my fault, I have liability there. But in general, you're signing your kid up for a sports camp. So the normal standard things that happen at sports camp, sprained ankle or a bug bite or a bee sting, will happen. And, that's not my fault as a camp director. That's informed consent. Implied consent, and this can be dangerous, and I think it's where I get in trouble for myself, is when you do something that indicates you agree. So, okay, we're going to draw some blood. You're at the doctor's office and you roll up your sleeve and put your arm out. Your actions indicate that you've agreed to the blood draw, right? Where this gets tricky is in the whole, relationships and sex agreement thing, where you agree to take your shirt off, but then when it comes time to take your pants off, you don't, but they take them off anyway. And they're saying, "Well, she took the shirt off. That told me she wanted her pants off." It doesn't always work that way. It's much more indicative in situations that are not sexual. Unanimous consent. Now, this is key right now and a big issue around a lot of same-sex spaces and multi-sex spaces in the news right now. Unanimous consent. Everyone involved says yes. This is an impossibility in a republic or a democratic society because we vote and the majority takes precedence. So if you have 100 people voting on something and 51 people vote yes and 49 vote no, the 49 that voted no, too bad, so sad. This can be okay in a lot of things, but when it comes to personal safety and physical boundaries and, children and minors and all that kind of stuff, it can be very, very hazy and tricky. Unanimous consent is more likely you're with a group of friends and you want to go to a party. You make sure everybody wants to go and you really make sure everyone agrees, yes, let's go, and then you all go. That kind of thing. When you're at a business meeting and you all agree to sign the contract and merger the company, that's unanimous consent. Active consent is when you do something that shows you consent. So signing up for an email list, knowing that you're going to get emails in your inbox every week, subscribing to an app, those kinds of things are active consent. Some people don't always realize that when you say yes to the first part, you're practicing active consent by saying yes to the app. The app is using implied consent to say, because you signed up, that means you're willing to pay every month. Do you see how nebulous this gets? All right. So when I looked up all of these definitions, I went through my life and thought about people and places and things that these things, memories evoked. I, of course, thought of my abuse and how that sort of framed my ability to consent. When I think of a lot of the sexual encounters I've had in my life over the years, the number of them that were me really not wanting to do it at all, not knowing how to say no, not thinking I had the right to say no, not saying no and just doing it and then getting out of there as fast as I could and showering and berating myself. I would never say who these people are because some of them were people I knew pretty well, did not want to sleep with them whatsoever and ended up doing it anyway. Going to freeze, just get it over with, get it over with. That came up a lot for me. Secret keeping. how I'm willing to keep people's secrets for them. And it shouldn't be my job to keep anybody's secret. Don't tell me something. If it's a secret, then keep it to yourself. Drugs and alcohol. So the number of times I've had a drink when I don't really want to, when I think back to my drug relationship with Doug and how I did not want to, sometimes smoke, whether it was pot or crack or drink. Didn't want to do any of those things. But once you've done it and you become addicted, you lose your ability to consent, right? I can't say yes anymore. And, I had to go back to when did I ever really consent to that? And I don't know that I ever did. I had some drug use in college that I definitely did on my own, but this was different. Friendships. Oh my gosh. So I think of a lot of friendships. Actually, one comes back the other way around. I remember going shopping once with a group of friends. We went to all the stores I wanted to, and we were walking home. One of my friends yelled at me, like I didn't do anything I wanted to do. All we did was follow you around. I had just not paid attention at all to body language, to maybe conversations we'd had, right? I just bullied it and did the whole thing. Normally, I'm on the receiving end of that. I've always been a bit of a follower socially. I just did what everyone else did because I felt like I should. And sometimes I wanted to, but I didn't want to. And I also know that the times I did have the guts to stand up and say no, it didn't always go well for me socially. I remember being at the docks at St. Paul's School once, and a bunch of people were there, and then people left, and it was just me and this boy, and he was a neighbor, and I was, like 12 years old. No, I was 13 or 14. And he looked at me and said, "Do you wanna?" And I didn't want to. And I'm like, "No, I don't think so." And he was not nice to me for years and years and years. And it's just like, what the hell? Like, I can't say no. So it taught me not to say no. So that was a lot of my relationships and like drugs and alcohol type things. Friendships. So when I think back to high school friendships, I would align myself with a group and I would do whatever they did because I wanted to fit in. I was very famous for that. But in adult friendships, I have some really, really solid examples. A good example is Robin. So when I was friends with Robin, she would say, "Hey, I'm going to come over and swim in your pool." And I'd say, "Okay," because it was just Robin. And then she'd say, "Oh, I invited X, Y, and Z, Susie and Billy and John." And I'm like, "Okay." And then her husband would show up with his car and then her kids would show up and pretty soon my yard is full of people and isn't there food? And Robin's like, "Oh, I thought we could have a cookout." And now suddenly I'm hosting a cookout. This happened to me once on July 4th. Now, granted, it was July 4th, but I started the day alone floating in my pool and it was just a beautiful day. And I had family coming over and I had things going on. Suddenly I'm hosting a 4th of July cookout. And I remember one time I really needed her and we had planned on getting together and spending the day together. It was after Molly had died. I said, "Could we just have a Barb and Robin day?" And she's like, "Well, let me see." And I didn't hear back from her. And then she posted all over Facebook about this fun time she was having at Joan's house and Joan's having a pool party. And I realized what she wanted was to take her family and go invade somebody's pool. And I said no. And so I spent the day all by myself. Helping me and being there for me wasn't what it was about for her. That was eye-opening for me, though. Those things happened a lot with Robin. I would get conjured into doing things and I didn't want to do it. Steph, when I worked at the charter school, she had no boundaries whatsoever. And when she was with me, she was logical and made sense. And she would ask me to do things and I could say yes and no. But when she was with her mother, she would impose things. And you said you'd do this when I hadn't said I would do it. But I wouldn't argue, I would do it. And I remember I hired an attorney for them, $20,000 of my own money to try to help her. And in the midst of this, they said I was racist and that I was a jerk and that I was trying to get them in trouble. I'm like, why would I spend all this my own money to help you? And their feeling was, well, you should have spent your own money. We gave you this job. Well, no, the state gave me the job. It was awful, but I wasn't strong enough to stand up for myself until the very end. However, when I did stand up for myself, publicly stood up for myself, I got a lot of hassle from a couple of friends of mine at the Concord Monitor who said I was making stuff up about them and I always wanted drama. So when everything came out, all the embezzlement and the laws broken and all that, I had some apologies coming to me, but it really hurt my friendships for a long time. Lenora, when she lied to me and said that, and didn't tell me that she told my attorneys that she referred us, that she never said I'm going to get a referral fee. She got me to sign a letter that I didn't understand at the time. And she said, it's written in legalese. It has to be this way. Basically, they want to hire me to help them, but they're going to pay me from their money, their part of the money, not your part of the money. So it doesn't affect what you'll get at all. That's not what happened. What she should have said is, if you say I referred you, I get a referral fee. Well, all she did was drive us there. So when I found this out, let's backtrack. So in the whole 2-year legal process, she had to make believe that she was working for them. So she would call us down to her office and have us do stuff. One of the times she had us give her our cell phones. Gracie, Kenny, and I, we went without cell phones for like 12 hours. And I'm like, why do you need these? And she goes, I'm bringing them to Mark and please don't talk about this. So basically, she had our cell phones and our passwords and she just looked through everything. And when I got them back, I knew that she must have looked through stuff. I'm like, did they find anything bad? And she's like, yeah, they're not too happy with a lot of what they saw. She looked at it. She never once showed it to them. I didn't find any of this out until after we had settled the lawsuit and I saw this big chunk of money she was getting and I asked why. And then I told the truth about it. I suffered exponentially for that. Robin cut me off. Anyone that's friends with Robin cut me off. She shared horrible things about me, horrible posts on Facebook. When went through that coaching fiasco at Bo, that's another time. I think she was a part of publishing this nasty letter. The whole thing was awful, and I just sort of let her do it. Talk about no consent. I didn't consent to Lenora telling Mark that I referred her. She lied and made it up and then tried to say I was the problem. I didn't stand up for myself. I was never asked how I felt about what was being done. And I signed a contract, informed consent. I was supposed to know what that meant, and I didn't, and I signed it anyway. And I remember I was going to mail it or I was going to bring it to him. She said, no, 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 I'll do it. And of course she'll do it because she didn't want me to have a conversation with him that didn't make sense because he would have explained it to me. But again, didn't consent to what she said was happening and because she lied about it. And I didn't say no. Polly. So Polly's MO is to say, can I borrow $5? And then when you give her $5, say, no, I thought we agreed on 50. That kind of manipulation of language. So the number of things I've done in that friendship, from financial support, gift card support, cars, houses, clothing, money lending, all of it, creating a job so that she could earn money. The things I've done that then get turned around when I stand up for myself and lay down boundaries. You have to stop yelling at me, Polly. You have to stop. This is my house. I'm trying to make this work for you and my mother. No, you can't have a birthday party when I'm halfway around the world in my house. All these, whenever I did, I haven't spoken to Polly now in a year and a half. I stood up for myself. Sometimes I can. It takes a while. My kitchen renovation, Taylor. I have a beautiful kitchen. I will say that the handiwork and the workmanship is beautiful, but $100,000 over budget, all for things she sort of says I agreed to, and then not listening to me. So I spend $30,000 more to fix things that I didn't like in her design that she insisted on happening. A cabinet design, the window size, the way the bathroom door opens, like the amount of space for storage, knocking down a wall I didn't want knocked down, like so many things that I did not agree to that were imposed upon. Didn't matter what I said. It was going to be her way. No informed consent at all there. I think that's my biggest one is I agree to things, not really knowing what I'm getting into and not having the guts to stand up and ask for clarification. The Bo situation. I've talked about this in its own episode, but I didn't stand up for myself to the AD. I didn't insist on legal representation. After all I'd gone through with Concord, I didn't insist on legal representation. I didn't just go forward and spill it to the newspaper. I just hid. I laid on my bed. I drank. I hid. I cried. I left town. Did all the same things I did when I lost my job in Concord. I learned nothing from it. And I think it's because I was in a situation where I felt like I didn't have the right to say anything. And then, of course, Amy and Roy. My whole friendship with Amy was based on her assumption and knowledge that I would not say no to anything she did. She'd show up at my house. She yelled at me once for not buying snowsuits for her kids when I went and bought snowsuits for my kids. Why would I do that? Like she would show up at my house with all these items of clothing she bought for me. Amy, I don't want clothing from you. Please take this back. I don't want these. Well, I bought them for you. Well, I don't want them. I didn't ask you to buy these for me. Well, we're friends. This is what friends do. No, friends would say, hey, I saw something really cute that I think you'd look good in. Go check it out. Right? Or they'd buy it and give it to you as a birthday gift. They wouldn't just show up at your house. And then when you don't return the favor, use it to say, well, I bought you things. This was a form of consent violation and manipulation of boundaries that was massive for me. I seek these people out. Amy is really no different than Roy. Well, I'll get to Roy in a minute. Than Robin and Lenora and Steph, Polly and Taylor. They're all really similar. And they find someone like me that they know will acquiesce. I'll just stop saying no. I might not say yes, but I won't stand up for myself and say no. And when I do, all hell breaks loose. And that's what happened with Amy when I really finally stood up to her and disagreed. I stopped helping her. She said terrible things, just made my work life at the timing company impossible. It really just, it didn't do me any good. Here's my problem. I can't do back what was being done to me. I couldn't make believe I liked her just to keep the peace. That much I have grown out of having to do. I made believe everything was fine for 7 years as a child because I didn't know how to deal with the sexual abuse. In friendships now, when things definitely are no longer okay, I'm better at backing away and standing up for myself. But it doesn't end well, and that didn't end well. And then I think the way that I felt like I was getting retribution was to help Roy so much. And then Roy became Amy and did the same thing. The number of times I just did what he said because it was just easier than not doing what he said. And knowing that if that whatever argument I put up, he'd find a way to manipulate and twist. Boy, did I lose the ability to fight. He was really, really good at the word salad piece, which is coercion and manipulation, twisting it around. You agree to something and they manipulate it to make it sound like you're really agreeing to something else, or you're not agreeing to that. It was all the time. When he yelled, when he took control over the restraining orders, and that the restraining order piece is really a key piece of a legal thing that was the number one thing in my job loss. I used public email to go through all the restraining order stuff with Amy, with my job loss, before my job loss. And I didn't want to use that email. I said, no, it needs to be my personal email. It can't be work email. I can reference something from a work email, but I can't use it. He insisted I do it. He made sure it showed up in everything we photocopied. And I'm just like, okay. And I knew it wasn't right. And sure enough, that was the main. It makes me think now that they worked together. And that's all speculation on my part. But there are so many coincidences now that I think I was a big joke to them. Like they got me. And then just my willingness to put up with it for as long as I did, even after Molly died and all the horrible things that happened after Molly died. I just put up with it. Molly's death. This is probably the biggest thing. Taking her to the doctors, not really fighting and demanding and insisting. Maybe sort of getting sucked into what the doctors said. They're the doctors. Trying to soothe Molly, even though she wasn't soothable and she wasn't right. Not listening to my gut. Not feeling I had the right to listen to my gut. When it all blew up and we're in the ER, not fighting for her. I got yelled at. I just sat and was quiet. I sat and I was quiet, and my daughter is dead. Now, Roy would say, see, you just admitted you killed your daughter. That's what Roy and Amy would say. That's the kind of manipulation that I'm privy to, that I fall to all the time. I didn't kill my daughter, but I didn't stand up and fight when I had a chance to get them to do what they should have done. Back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, right? And then we file a lawsuit and I get manipulated by Lenora, right? And then in a medical malpractice lawsuit, the lawyers don't want to go to court. It's all insurance companies, the big hospital insurance companies, medical malpractice insurance. It's multi-million-dollar business. Those insurance companies want the doctors to screw up. They make money, right? So doctors have to pay more on the insurance now. So when you sign off on a lawsuit, you're agreeing, this is my analogy, you're agreeing to keep your rape a secret to protect your rapist. So when I signed my confidential separation agreement with Concord School District, I was agreeing to never tell the truth about what happened to me. Even though what happened to me was completely unethical and wrong and remains a massive issue in my life today because I live in my town, and the medical malpractice. Anytime I get too wordy, which I'm going to get very wordy in this season, I get some letter of reprimand, or you can't say that or whatever. It bothers me. Medical malpractice. Yes, I got a chunk of money to shut my mouth. But if I say anything, one little thing, I have to pay a big fine, or I can have to pay all the money back. Those doctors had to take a class and pay a very small fine. That's all they had to do. And now they're just fine. Keep practicing medicine. Do your thing. And there are people at Concord Hospital that think I'm a bad person for suing the hospital. Oh, death happens. Yeah, well, okay, I didn't consent to my daughter not being treated. There was no informed consent in her treatment at all. Consent, consent, consent. Being easily taken advantage of, that's me. Saying the quiet parts out loud. Stories of things we don't talk about. There are so many things we don't talk about. And there are so many things that affect people so differently. In the big picture of life, I feel that nobody's consent should be violated, that everybody should have spaces to feel safe and to thrive and to succeed. I think that any community that's had to fight for equality ever on any level is and always will be a marginalized community, and that members of a community that have not had to fight for rights should not be allowed to step into those things. This is where race gets involved, where gender gets involved. Who are the marginalized communities and what are their rights? I think that consent can't be given if it goes against the consent of others. I don't have the right to give consent for every woman in the world. I only have the right to give consent for me and demand consent for myself. We live in a world now where it doesn't matter what political party you align with, women are in big trouble. And I feel very, very Just be quiet, Barbara, just be quiet, right? It continues to this day. So consent, it's something we all should study and practice. It's something we all should reflect upon and see how we use it in our lives. How do you give consent? Is there a time that you didn't give consent, that something terrible happened? Is there a time that you agreed to something you really didn't want to do and it was the best thing ever, right? What do you notice in your daily life that involves your consent? For the most part, if we don't consent to something, we can avoid it. If I don't like a religion, I don't have to go to that church. Doesn't mean I'm phobic of that religion. It just means I don't go to that church, right? If I don't consent to doing drugs, then I can just not do drugs, right? So sometimes we have a choice, and our consent can be evidenced in the choices we make. When a choice is imposed upon us because of some sort of consent or lack thereof, the whole landscape changes. And for people like me that have had a hard time really standing up for themselves their whole lives and trying to defend how I feel without being called a monster, it has been difficult. But the people in my life that have done those things know that I'll fall for it. They look very keenly for people like me, and I'm easy to take advantage of. That is not an invitation. That is not consent to take advantage of me. That's my story for this episode of season 13, consent. And what does it mean to you? Give yourself consent to be good to yourself. Be good to yourself. Say no if you want to say no. Lay down boundaries if you need to do that. You have the right to do that. You're worth it. Be good to someone else. Respect their boundaries. If you disagree with them, love them anyway. You don't have to hang out with them if you disagree with them, right? And as always, have a good day, everybody. Hey, thanks for listening and supporting the podcast. Feel free to leave a review and share my stories with your friends. Please reach out with your own stories, as I love connecting with my listeners. If you would like to get to know Molly, head over to mollybfoundation.org to see what she is all about. If you want to see what I'm up to next, you can find me on Instagram at Barb_444, on Facebook as Barb Higgins, and at my website, 1000tinysteps.com. And while you're there, sign up for my newsletter, a weekly way to find out what's up in the life of Barb Higgins.